Good evening and a very warm welcome to this edition of Public Forum. The Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi-led NDA government at the centre has completed its first year in the office. A year is a long time in politics, but indeed a very short time to judge a government elected for 5 years. But from tackling corruption, addressing governance issues, bridging the rural-urban divide and managing a dwindling economy to giving a fresh push to areas like cleanliness, women empowerment, self-sufficiency in manufacturing, infrastructure, and a big leap in foreign policy. A number of steps have been taken in the last 1 year. While it is important to celebrate the achievements of the NDA government at the centre, it is also time to look at the challenges that lies ahead. So we discuss it in today's edition of Public Forum. Right, and to discuss all of this, I'm joined by Mr. Devendra Kumar Pant, who's the Chief Economist with India Ratings and Research, Dr. Anirban Ganguly, who's the Director with the S.P. Mukherjee Research Foundation, Mr. N. Chandra Mohan, who is the Visiting Fellow with Research Information System for Developing Countries, and Professor Ravi Shankar Srivastav, who is associated with the CSRD, the Centre for Study of Regional Development, JNU. We'll start the discussion, but first let us take you through what the Prime Minister said yesterday at the rally that happened at Mathura, which was in fact a celebration to mark the 1 year of NDA government at the centre.
चुनाव 2014 में न हुए होते और शायद अगर मानो चुनाव आज हुए होते, एक साल उन्हें और मिल गया होता तो देश कितना डूब गया होता। आप कल्पना कीजिए कि अगर आपने इतना बड़ा फैसला न किया होता तो आज देश की हालत क्या हुई होती। जब तक हम उन बातों का विचार नहीं करेंगे तब तक हम कहां से निकले थे, कहां पहुंचे हैं, उसका सही अंदाज नहीं आएगा। जहां पर मिनरल्स हैं, जहां खदानें हैं, इसका ऑक्शन होगा और कुछ पैसे उसका एक फाउंडेशन बनेगा। ज्यादातर ये कोयला हो, ये मिनरल्स हो, ये आदिवासी क्षेत्रों में है, जंगलों से जुड़ी हुई है। हमने एक बड़ा महत्वपूर्ण फैसला किया कि कुछ परसेंटेज पैसा उसका उस डिस्ट्रिक्ट का फाउंडेशन बनेगा और उन पैसों का उपयोग वहां के गरीब आदिवासियों के कल्याण के लिए खर्च किया जाएगा, वहां के गरीब लोगों के लिए खर्च किया जाएगा। भाइयों बहनों, कोयला पहले भी निकलता था, लेकिन गरीब की भलाई के लिए कोई काम नहीं होता था। हमने नियम बनाया कि काम होगा, देश को आर्थिक ऊंचाइयों पर ले जाएंगे, विश्व में भारत अपना नाम रोशन करे, उस दिशा में आगे बढ़ेंगे। उसके लिए एक के बाद एक कदम हम उठाते चले जा रहे हैं। भाइयों बहनों, 365 दिन मैंने जो काम किया है, सरकार ने जो काम किया है, अगर मैं सारा गिनाने जाऊं तो 365 घंटे भी कम पड़ जाएंगे। भाइयों बहनों, हर पल नया निर्णय किया है, हर पल नया इनिशिएटिव लिया है, हर पल परिवर्तन का प्रयास किया है। और मैंने आपको कहा था, मैं कभी चैन से बैठूंगा नहीं, मैं कभी वैकेशन नहीं लूंगा, मैं कभी आराम नहीं करूंगा। मेरे भाइयों बहनों, कोई शिकायत है क्या आपकी? कोई शिकायत है क्या? जरा मुझे दोनों हाथ ऊपर करके आशीर्वाद दीजिए। कोई शिकायत है क्या आपकी? दोनों हाथ ऊपर करके मुझे आशीर्वाद दीजिए, मुझे ताकत दीजिए, ताकि मैं आपकी सेवा में कोई कमी न रखूं।
So as I said in the beginning, a year certainly is a very long time in politics, but is too little when it comes to a government of 5 years, elected for 5 years, and these are the first 365 days of this government. I'd like to start with you, Professor Srivastav. Since, you deal with a particular, department of the JNU which studies as to how the development models have picked up or development really happens at various levels. How do you look at the push that this government has given to a variety of sectors? You actually have to take down a list of things to notice as to what new schemes have been announced and have been launched in the last 1 year. What is your assessment?
Well, as you rightly said, I think this was extremely correct that 1 year is a very short time to judge a government. The reason is that a lot of things which happen are a carryover of the past. And in the current times, an economy is extremely influenced by what is happening globally. Global upturns and downturns affect the economy. In fact, actually, if you look at the economic trends, although, the new GDP revised figures have changed the way you look at the past, because if you believe those figures, then there was no severe crisis from 2011-12 to 14-15 or 13-14. But the fact is that if you look at the older figures, the economy was beginning to come out of the recession in the early years of 2014. So by the time this government came into existence, you already see a small upturn.
Right.
And then after that, the global upturn has also actually strengthened over the year. Global commodity prices have slackened, particularly food prices have slackened globally. Petroleum prices, as we know, virtually halved or more than halved, and then now there is a slight upturn. All this has influenced what has happened in the economy. But having said that, there is absolutely no doubt that the government has taken some very energetic steps. And some of these steps, one has to say, have been steps which, it is not that these steps were not already there. For example, the emphasis on manufacturing.
Right.
But the way Make in India has been marketed, the way Make in India has been taken up, this whole emphasis on manufacturing is an extremely desirable emphasis, because obviously this economy cannot enter a sustained growth process without emphasis on manufacturing and without manufacturing growing.
Right.
I think that is a very key issue.
Right.
But I must say that it is very difficult to change macroeconomic parameters over a short time. So even now, if you look at the 2014-15 figures, and if you discount all the euphoria and all the political, debates that are taking place, investment in 2014-15 is actually still lower than 2013-14. Exports have declined, imports have declined. Non-food credit growth has declined,
right.
And obviously the government also knows all this. So in other words, we are still not, we haven't still completely come out of the kind of slowdown and crisis that we have. The government has built confidence,
right.
And you can see this reflected not only among Indian industries, but also globally.
Right.
But for this confidence to translate into investment,
right.
to translate into jobs,
right.
will still take time, and it will also depend upon circumstances globally.
But what is very critical, in fact, and what's something which is an unmissable aspect, Dr. Chandra Mohan, is the fact that we have seen the Prime Minister going out, visiting nations, and using that as a platform to talk about schemes like the Make in India. When it is about bringing investment, using every single opportunity to voice that concern. What would you like to say about those gestures?
It is definitely an example of leveraging the external for the internal, and it's a big differentiator from the previous experience, where he went consciously with a sort of a coherent economic thinking of Make in India, which very much inspired by the East Asian sort of this thing example. And every country he touched base, like Japan and right down to China, which was his last major, and South Korea. He kept emphasizing that your investments are welcome. So in some sense, he's relying on a FDI-driven strategy to supplement the weak situation at home, so that to boost demand, create manufacturing capacity in this country with FDI. So he's trying, there is a coherent vision there, and it is a clear differentiator, because I don't think earlier any Indian leader went with such an economic agenda to say we need investments to kickstart type of thing. So he has appealed. And he has also appealed leveraging the external for the internal. He has also, for the first time, as a differentiator, he has appealed to the diaspora to seek their participation in India's activity, India's development, to participate in the India story. And China is a very big success story of harnessing the energies of the diaspora. To this extent, appealing to these people to go beyond this getting an interest rate differential, saying that your domestic investments, non-repatriable, are investments, are not FDI, is trying to get them involved in the India story in a much more purposive manner. So these two things, this going abroad to these developed countries like US, Japan, China, South Korea, seeking FDI, appealing to the diaspora, the rockstar welcomes he received, was directly aimed at a connection with them, saying that, hey, there's a lot of work back at home, why don't you help with that? So that's, to that extent, he's on the front foot. He has been very purposive in that. There's an energetic stride in what he's doing. So this I would consider his differentiation.
Two of the very crucial things, Dr. Ganguly, have been, as one would look at, is the way the Indian Ocean diplomacy has, the kind of direction that has been given to that, along with the Act East, which is a different thing which this government has talked about. But do you think that it automatically also comes with a lot of onus? Because now it's not just about visiting and attracting nations to invest and to engage more with India, but also to take it forward. And there are some very critical perennial issues, let's say, with countries like China, which could be to do with, of course, the serious issues like the border, the boundary issue, or the fact that it's really building its infrastructure in the POK, something which the Prime Minister did not miss when he met the Chinese President on day one in Xi'an. How do you look at, taking these relationships forwards?
In fact, I have been going on referring to his speech at the Tsinghua University, where he very clearly said that the last century was a century of alliances. This century is that of interdependence.
That's right.
And we should not really engage. Our relation with others should not be a cause of concern for each other. So that was a very clear message that Prime Minister gave. On the IOR and the Act East, you see, the fact that, and as Professor said, the fact that he is going to these countries and spearheading these new dimensions means that he is confident, or he's exuding that conviction that there will be a follow-up or a delivery. For example, in Mongolia, he referred to Mongolia being integral to our Act East policy, which was something very interesting. I mean, he is essentially stretching it up to that point and beyond. So there's a very clear idea about it. And because of Act East, what is happening is that there's a special focus now on infrastructure development in the Northeast and linking the Northeast through Myanmar and beyond. And he's already undertaken visits as a, trying to work that out. The Indian Ocean region is something very unique because he's focused on that. And there was this, in March this year, there was a huge seminar where RIS also participated just after the Prime Minister's visit. And there was this concerted view that Prime Minister's visit to the Indian Ocean region essentially creates a kind of autonomy even in the Indian states, which are the coastal states, and makes them partners in the Indian Ocean strategy and in the Indian Ocean development.
Right.
So these are some very interesting dimensions which are coming up.
But one of the analysis which I have in fact come across is the fact that many people are trying to assess as to how India and China are going to be together now in a different kind of format, because both these countries are seen as competitors. Especially since we are talking about the Indian Ocean region, it is seen as an area where India hasn't really come out with a policy for the Indian Ocean region, where China has, of course, made an influence. But the fact that now India and China are also emerging as partners.
Yes, exactly.
So that's something which one would really have to see as to how that really shapes. What's your view on that?
Yes, my point is, again, I refer to that speech of Prime Minister at the Tsinghua University. I think very clearly he spells out the challenges and the opportunity for partnership. with China. So the competition is there, but that competition, that competition, he's very clear, should build upon a partnership. It did not really step onto each other's toes, so to say. The Indian, and especially after his personal focus in the Indian Ocean region, there's definitely going to be a more proactive strategy in that entire region, and it was very clearly enunciated during his visit, as well as External Affairs Minister's visit, that in the Indian Ocean region, India wants to really recover or re-emerge as a facilitator, and definitely not as a hegemon. And so essentially there's a very clear difference to the way India approaches the Indian Ocean region.
Right. Mr. Pant, one thing which one would have to certainly look at is the way that much has been talked about how India has been rated, internationally by countries as probable investment destination. Now one would have to see as to when India really engages with these countries, specifically when a government of this country says that we are going to act towards the east, we are really going to make this region a very strong and a potential exchange forum, where the countries would be exchanging with each other and at the same time would emerge equally as an investment hub. What does it really, what is the strong message that it conveys globally about India?
Well, to me, it seems we are giving a message to entire world. Look, we are a kind of economy by the size, whether we look at it in the PPP dollar, it will be 4th or 5th largest economy. Somehow we are not able to get that kind of attention from the global partners. Look East policy is, or look at any policy, any country those who has emerged as the superpower, be it earlier the USSR, USA or the China. It's made by their economic might, whereby they can help other countries, they can provide some, like what China is doing. They are building ports, other infrastructures, not only in Sri Lanka, in POK, and even African countries also. And at the back end, what is there? Where is the coal? Because China is the largest coal consumer in this world.
Right.
They are powered.
The economy and the energy, these are two sectors which actually.
So where are these natural resources? Where by giving some aid or building something to their in those economies which is beneficial to them, how can I take advantage of that? And the same strategy we have to apply. But but Ms. Pant, what can one make out of the huge amount of agreements that have been signed, not just between these two countries, but even in the other visits, bilateral visits that we've seen with some other nations? Because mind it, there were 18 countries have been visited during a good span of 1 year by this government, by the Prime Minister. What does it really convey? I mean, because if one reads those agreements, those MOUs, you see every sector covered. You see there are linkages on issues like vocational training, education, space, technology, building infrastructure, to the fact that there is also going to be association on the renewable energy front. What does it really say? You have to look at two aspects. One, any bilateral trade negotiation or agreement, it is always give and take. And if we believe we are going to get and we are not going to give anything, that will be living in a fool's paradise. So basically there will be something which those economies are asking, and what developed world is asking as on today, because it's the biggest market. It's the market which is growing. Despite slowing down, our private consumption expenditure is growing at 7% or so. So that's the one attraction India has for all the economies in the world. So that is one thing. So when India will ask for something, they will ask for open access or access to Indian market. This is on one side. Now there are many bilaterals, but if you look at FDI approval and FDI inflow, there is hardly 20% of the inflow. Of the approval, only hardly 20% comes, because
it is not that any commitment which is given today that in next 1 year that will flow in. Because there are so many things, so much groundwork has to be done. You start a trade negotiation and you said, we will invest $40 billion in India. Now to that $40 billion to come in, there are so many things which has to be worked out. Something which India will create for those economies and something which other economies will create for India. It's not that $40 billion will come in India for free. We have to give something to those economies also.
Okay. And you see that there is a lot of metal in the fact that the companies are also coming together and signing deals with each other. This may not be a new phenomenon, but you see them being very proactive.
This is common. The only thing is when you start after, as discussed earlier, from 2011-12 onward, we were on the downward path. From 12-13 started moving up. But in entire this discussion, we should look for one more thing. Is look what is happening to the global economy. Since year 2012 and the latest appraisal of the IMF for the global economy, and when we look for the global economy, we should not look only at the growth number. We should look at what is happening to the trade. If I look at from 2000 to 2015, all right, there are only 5 years when the global trade growth was fallen below the global GDP growth. One was after dot-com burst in 2001. Second was after global financial crisis in 2009. And consistently from 2012 till 2015, the expectation of WTO and IMF, the global trade growth has fallen below the global GDP growth. So the global economy is growing at something around 3.5%. But the global trade growth, which during 2003-4 to 2008 period was at 20% or so, has now fallen to 2.8%.
Right.
Now, if this is the situation, every country is running after a very small incremental change in global demand, global trade, and there is where every country is trying to get a pie of it. Be it China, be it US, be it India.
Okay, fine. On that note, we'll take a very quick break now in Public Forum. Please stay tuned for more on the other side of this break.
अच्छे दिन तो लोगों का आएगा, एक तो पेट्रोल के दाम इतने आसमान में पहुंच गए।
ये तो कांग्रेस और यूपीए सरकार की कमियों की वजह से हमको एक साल तो माहौल बनाने में लग रहा है।
मुझको लगता है कि अच्छे दिन आ गए हैं।
2014 में उम्मीद की क्रांति हुई। जापान गए, $35 बिलियन की इन्वेस्टमेंट का प्रॉमिस लेके आए। मैं प्रॉमिस ही बोल रहा हूँ।
जी ठीक है। आज प्राइम मिनिस्टर वहां जाकर क्या बोल रहा है? वो कह रहा है भाई हम स्थिर सरकार है, हमारे पास पूरा मैंडेट है, जो हम कह रहे हैं हम करेंगे।
सरकार का विजन किसको फायदा पहुंचाने वाला है। 1 साल की नीतियां और गंभीरता दर्शाती है कि सबका साथ सबका विकास का चुनावी नारा कितना सही साबित हो रहा है।
क्या बात है, पिक्चर पूरा ख्याल रखते हो। इन्हें दोनों टीके लगवा दिए हैं ना? हाँ, 2 बालकनी देना भाई साहब। हाँ, पहले साल 4 बार जाना, 4 बार 6 खतरनाक बीमारियों से अपने बच्चे को बचाने के लिए। पहले साल 4 बार टीकाकरण, शिशु का सुरक्षित जीवन। 4 बार टीके पहले साल, शिशु की यही है सुरक्षित देखभाल।
राष्ट्रीय टीकाकरण अभियान, रक्षा कार्ड और मुफ्त टीकों के लिए ANM या आंगनवाड़ी बहन जी से मिले।
ये है हमारी लाइब्रेरी, यहाँ हर किताब मिलेगी। अब तो हमारे यहाँ एडमिशन ले ही लो।
नहीं, मैं आपके कोचिंग सेंटर में एडमिशन नहीं लूंगा। जब आप किताबों पर पड़ी धूल को साफ नहीं कर सकते, तो हमारी अज्ञानता की धूल को कैसे साफ करेंगे? स्वच्छ भारत अभियान ने हम उपभोक्ताओं को देश को स्वच्छ बनाने की एक नई जिम्मेदारी दी है और हमें इसे निभाना है।
स्वच्छ भारत अभियान उपभोक्ताओं की सोच को दे एक नया आयाम।
जागो, ग्राहक जागो।
Welcome back. In Public Forum today, we are talking about the achievements of the NDA government at the centre in the last 1 year, as well as the challenges that lies ahead. Okay, Professor Shrivastava, I'd like to start with you. You know, much has been said about the fact that we have to really bring in more life into our economy. There have been a number of steps which have been taken from the governance point of view to, in fact, even bringing in some sort of tax reforms, and the fact that every person should be a part of the whole economic cycle. There shouldn't be gaps and divisions as we have seen in Indian economy. Are we really close to achieving those things, or what do you think would emerge as problems or challenges?
You are absolutely touching the crux of the problem, or at least the second part of your statement. On the growth side, you see, we shouldn't look at growth in the long run. Actually, India is currently experiencing one of the longest episodes of high growth. It began somewhere in the late 70s, accelerated from about 92-93, accelerated further between 2003-4 and 2007-8, and in fact over the long run the growth rate now with the new figure still remains extremely good after 2002-3-4. So we had a very long episode, and now economists are beginning to say, is this just an episode, or will India be able to sustain it? Now, one of the issues with this growth is that although we've had very brisk growth, we've also had continuously escalating inequalities in the Indian economy, particularly after 92-93. Regional inequalities have grown, intergroup inequalities have grown, interpersonal inequalities have grown. Equalities in the workplace have grown. So, for example, the wages of unskilled to managerial employees, which were around 2.2 or so in the mid-90s, are now 4+. So there's been a doubling of the gap at the enterprise level. This is a very serious issue. Now, one of the lessons we learned after the economic crisis, the financial crisis of 2008-9, and this is virtually a consensus on this, that to get out of situations like this, you need to generate demand. And irrespective of the focus on international demand, and global trade is extremely important, domestic demand is extremely important. And if you have large inequalities, then domestic demand, the deficiency in domestic demand cannot be circumvented. So these two things, there is obviously a human rights angle, if you like to call it that, to inequality, because no economy, no society can sustain large inequalities and growing inequalities. So you have to have a strategy of how to overcome this. Secondly, there is the sustainable growth side of it, which says that you have to work, generate incomes and demand at the bottom of the pyramid. India can grow at a particular level on the basis of growing demand of the top 20%. In fact, this is exactly what happened between 2002-3 and 11-12. Demand did grow, but it was on the basis of higher incomes of the top 20%. So this is, in fact, one of the significant challenges, and I don't see policy voices currently addressing it within the government. How do you actually grow sustainably? How do you increase domestic demand? See, there are two sides to it. In Make in India can be about investments. Investments is one side of it. Make in India will never become a story unless we have aggregate demand at the bottom of the pyramid.
One thing which I want to understand is that, how does one define sustainable growth?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if you can just enlighten us more on that.
You see, sustainable growth can again, and I hear we as economists, we have to distinguish between sustainable growth and sustainable development. When you talk about sustainable development, you have in mind human ecology, you have in mind the relationship between human beings and environmental resources.
Right.
And you're literally looking at how growth can be sustained in the future in terms of also the exploitation of resources. By sustainable growth, we have in fact much narrower focus. All that we are saying is, can a reasonably high rate of growth be sustained into the future? And even doing that actually requires, the two are interlinked. And if you look at the post 2015, consensus which is now developing, we are saying the sustainable development, sustainable growth, and an end to poverty also means more equitable growth. And that is something, I think internationally this is so well recognized now that our policy makers, past and present, have to get away from a certain kind of growth fetishism. It is very good to have high growth, but high growth is a necessary condition it is not a sufficient.
Okay, on the face of it, let me ask Dr. Ganguly here. You know, there are certain things, if one just tries to put them together on a page and tries to read it. There is a call to have 100% banking network. There is also this thing of, extending the social benefits to ensure that the insurance can be extended to the maximum number of people. When there is a focus on Make in India or manufacturing sector, or, the fact that at least the share of the manufacturing can be grown. Simultaneously, there is a focus on labor reforms too, with not just the launch of new schemes, but the fact that we also generate skilled labor. Is it all really, in your view, going to take us towards that sustainable growth thing? Because after all, you see, one of the critical deficiencies in the Indian economy has been the inequalities. Are we going to really address that?
I'm really not, I don't know whether I'm qualified to answer that question in detail. But yesterday when Prime Minister spoke, he enumerated whatever was done in the last 1 year. But one thing he emphasized was on this reaching out to the last person standing. And all the schemes that have been launched have been launched with the focus of addressing that last, which in Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyay's philosophy is called the Antyodaya. So that's very clear. And obviously all these are challenges. Each of these schemes have to benefit that last person standing.
Absolutely.
And these are challenges.
That's right.
And yesterday it was very clear in Prime Minister's delivery that he is there to address these challenges. And these are deliverable goals that he has given himself and his government. This is this concept of he referred to the Mudra Bank. He referred to the emphasis on skill development. As far as I can feel, and as far as some of us who have been interacting with these sections, this has generated a certain amount of confidence. And if you recall his first speech in the Lok Sabha, where he says, he gives an interesting anecdote, his encounter with a very senior Gandhian, where they have this exchange and where the meaning of education comes in. And he says that's where I internalized this belief, this conviction that there has to be skill development, and that has to be a very important component of education. So I think all these flagship schemes or initiatives that have been launched have a great degree of connectivity amongst themselves. And this is done with the objective of very seriously addressing that word, that inequality, that state of being that is inequality. Because again, I referred to the speech yesterday because there, where he was sitting yesterday before the public rally at the birthplace of Deen Dayal Upadhyay, since he is not in the current discussion now, perhaps now that is changing, Upadhyay gave a very interesting definition of Dharma Rajya. He says it's not a theocratic state, but he says it's a state where there is no division, no inequality. And any system, any government that works towards that is actually working towards bringing about the Dharma Rajya. Yes. So I found that very interesting because it's that system creation which will finally tackle or face or take up the challenge of driving away or dissolving inequality. This much I can.
Okay. Professor Srivastava, one more quick question here, because you see, whenever we talk about bringing in inequality, there had been, in fact, if one would just jot down a couple of challenges, you find that there is a lot of focus on the fact that government should increase its spending on some very, very crucial areas. For example, our public expenditure on health, education, other areas remains very low. And now on top of that, there are several other areas which need that focus, whether it's empowerment by employment, or it's issues which affect each one of us, whether it's environment protection or it's cleanliness or it's empowerment of the marginalized in this country. What would you say about the fact that more money has to be created and then it has to be spent?
Yeah.
What are the challenges on that front?
Yeah, but let me just very quickly say that I probably I was a member of the Arjun Sen Gupta Commission. And two of the recommendations of the Commission were a national mission on skill development and a national bank for the unorganized sector. With the Mudra Bank and the national and the mission for the skill development, there are two things. But still, we worked very hard for 5 years, and I think we produced 11 excellent reports. It was a pity that the last government did very little to implement what this Commission had suggested. I would certainly hope this new government reads those reports instead of reinventing the wheel. And one of the things which we very strongly say is that the poor need support. They need support, and spending, there has to be pro-poor spending. That is why it's a little bit disconcerting actually, although this is a very mixed year because the 14th Finance Commission has reallocated expenditures in a particular way and so on. But undoubtedly, I think many of us are worried about the cutbacks in the social sector. And still what we see is a lack of commitment to improve the health sector, improve public spending on health, which is the lowest, among the lowest in the world. You know, some of the schemes which have been announced, the social security schemes, are essentially market-based schemes. And I must say that not enough homework has been done. So much work has been done by us and by others on these schemes. Actually, as market-based schemes, they are bad schemes. You know, for example, we have the the pension yojana, in which the government's fine print says that the premiums can actually go up after 3 years. Where do we have a group life insurance scheme where pensions would, the poor get locked into a scheme, and after 3 years the insurer has the right to raise pensions, to raise premiums. So these are not very, some of the homework which needed to be done have not been done very well. More needs to be done. You know, I think it's very pleasant to see the government talking, and I think you rightly said beginning to address these issues. But I think let us not reinvent the wheel, or at least let there be more discussion on how these extremely important issues can be addressed.
You know, let me ask you, Dr. Chandramohan, since there had been a lot of focus on ensuring that, you know, as I said, a fresh impetus to the manufacturing sector. There's also a fact that, you know, the micro, small, medium enterprises, the investments in it should be raised. But this is all we have heard that it's going to happen. Till date, this has been one of the focus areas. If at all, you know, let's say if proper steps are taken, we are certainly going to address a major part of the problem of unemployment, because remember, we are the country with the highest percentage of demographic dividend. We are the ones who have the highest number of, you know, educated but unemployable youth. What do you say about that? By addressing the job part, at least a part of that equality and the inequality issue at least can be addressed.
Most definitely, because the track record on employment creation over the last 1 year has not been anything to write home about, considering the fact that 10 to 12 million people enter the labor force.
Right, annually.
The sort of labor force surveys, quarterly surveys, indicate a very 400,000 type of jobs which are being created, which is just a drop in the ocean.
So when you say about 12.8 million people actually annually enter this thing, and just 4% of them
it's just a small drop in the ocean.
One would say. Yeah.
So the thing is, what do you do about it? So manufacturing, that's the thing which has been talked about, and to raise it. But SME, you asked about MSME, and one thing that when you talk to micro and small and medium industrialists, they say that despite the government's efforts to improve the conditions for doing business, nothing has really changed on the ground.
For them?
For them. Just from their point of view, that they have to meet the same set of people. The rigors of regulation have not been eased for them. They continue to file forms after forms, and basically, so if you're talking about dynamizing that sort of sector, which is 40, which
does the fact that they are planning consolidation of 35 different labor laws into 4 bills or 4 pieces of legislation, does it indicate, does it give you any hope there in simplification of procedures, which has been something which this government has talked about from the beginning?
Simplification of procedures, let me put it this way. The efforts of the center to push labor reform will meet the same fate as 20 years back when the architect of reforms tried to push through the changes and step back.
And why do you say so?
The reason for this is this. You cannot take the unions on board and tell them that exit is not a four-letter word. And even today, the trade union of the ruling party is on the agitational path. They are in no mood to accept any change that will put them on. But that being said, let me complete what I'm saying. The hope here, if you want this simplification, the collapse of these 35 regulations and things like that, that action, if it comes from the states, that could be a differentiator. That could be a make difference, like, say, what Rajasthan is wanting to do, or what, say, Madhya Pradesh is wanting to do, or what this thing, what Gujarat has done earlier, or what Maharashtra is doing. These are all under their control. So if they lead the way and the others follow, a bit of flexibility in the labor market is not a bad idea if there is social protection. If that comes about,
you will
that
see
labor utilization moves up and down in lines with the business cycle. But there is a hard line, there is protection.
In the heart, you know, does this matter really lies at the heart of bringing or making India a manufacturing hub, and also watching that everybody gets to, you know, enjoy the benefits of all these schemes?
Well, if you look on paper, increasing manufacturing share to the GDP or the total production process, but ultimately where we are stuck. Agriculture has declined to what, 16% or 15% of the total production?
Right.
But still around half of the labor force is in agriculture. So they are employed, but they are literally underemployed. And if we have to pull out those labor force from agriculture, where will find jobs for them? The jobs for them will be available on the shop floor of the manufacturing sector. So the manufacturing has to grow. There's no, nobody can deny that. But when we are talking about the manufacturing to grow, the serious issue for the manufacturing as on today is the quality of labor force.
It's, can I?
If I have to find out a person, an analyst of some qualification, some kind of expertise, it is really very difficult to find, quote unquote, the quality I'm looking for. So most of the time I have to settle for second best. Why the China was able to do? China was able to do it through export-led growth, supplying to all over the world the basic things which requires minimum amount of skills to produce them and flood the global market. Right? You have say a cup, you will find most of the places made in China. So you have to concentrate on the skills until unless you upgrade those skills. And even if you are talking about some high-tech manufacturing, there you need super specialized skills. There the challenges are much more than moving from agriculture to shop floor.
So the point I wanted to make it, I think, you know, there is this thing about, you know, flexible labor, hiring, firing, and this somehow being the most important impediment to manufacturing. Actually, nothing shows that. Every survey and the overall, you know, growth process shows that what is much more important is to have a generally supportive environment and high growth. So in other words, if you have good infrastructure, if you have a good supportive environment, a good banking infrastructure, only regulations which matter, and so on, then growth will be high. Growth in manufacturing was close to 10% between 2002-3 and in the high growth period. Investment in manufacturing was close to 13.5 to 14% over this period. I don't know how many people are aware that 70% of the workforce in the organized manufacturing sector today is what we call an informal sector. And actually in the informal workforce is the biggest impediment to skills. Because if you have a worker who is actually rotating, for 3 months, 6 months, then the employer has no incentive to invest in the worker's skills. And the worker doesn't have any framework in which he or she can acquire skills.
But one thing which...
I just want to make the point that China, one of the differences between China and India is that even though real wages in China are about twice as high as in India, their productivity is 3 to 4 times as high. China was able to, at one point of time, China was just a little ahead of us in terms of share in the garment exports internationally. They managed to increase their share to about 35-38%. We were 3.5%, and we are still 3.5 to 3.8%.
Basically, in line of just variation on the contributions, this thing. Right now, to say that skills is a constraint, standing in the way of lifting the manufacturing share of GDP, I think, and comparing it with China, is slightly problematic for this reason, that to move from the countryside to the cities, there is no factory employment. There are no SEZs which fueled the Chinese boom, where today China's agricultural labor surpluses have run out. They have passed the Lewis point. Today we don't have that in India.
But you
need facilities.
Right.
You need to take them, even at a basic unskilled level, a job on the factory floor. That is absent.
One thing which I would like to understand here, because you cannot keep two things apart. They are all interlinked. Dr. Ganguly, the focus on cooperative federalism, the fact that states should be a part of the process of development, not just domestically, but we saw a step ahead when the Prime Minister visited China, where the leaders and the representatives of the states here in the provinces there could sit and talk, and to come up with a body which would mean constant interaction between the two. What does it really mean? Because after all, states certainly have some very good models of development which can be emulated in different parts of the country too, but the fact that states are also given a lot of responsibility. How do you look at and interlink these factors with the cooperative federalism?
I think this is a very major shift actually, and in China, Prime Minister referred to this. He said that he told his Chinese audience that this as much as we do, that policies may be decided somewhere up there, but the states have to be equal partners in implementing and making those policies successful. He then worked it out by inviting the chief ministers who accompanied him, and then there's this whole reference to Team India. It comprises the Prime Minister and the chief ministers. So definitely this mindset of central control, or the center decides what is good for the states, and especially during the 70s and 80s and 90s, West Bengal, if I take the example of West Bengal, there was this continuous line in West Bengal which said that we are being discriminated against by the center. And so this was a common refrain in other states as well. I don't think in the last 1 year this refrain has been heard. And this Team India is not a slogan. It's a very clear implementation of this reaching out and this entire system of cooperative federalism. It's very interesting when Prime Minister was Chief Minister of Gujarat, just about I think 2 years back, Brookings Institution had this paper, Brookings paper, written by this senior researcher fellow, where they made a comparison of how the current Chinese president was an effective such chief minister, is also an effective state leader, potentially to become a national leader. So that was a very interesting comparison, and I found that very interesting that in China again this was referred to. So this is something I think which he has believed throughout, contrary to perception. I think he has very distinctly and very clearly felt this, and within the first year it was at least some major expressions of that vision can be seen.
Right. But Dr. Ganguly, in your view, what are the critical challenges which the government will have to overcome in the upcoming days and years? Because after all, you know, as we had just said, economy and energy are really going to test the might of all these developing nations. We are one among them. And we have to also ensure that, you know, people in our country do not really suffer from, you know, are not distressed. We know about the farmers who suffer this day after day, and a lot of the people, because this government also doesn't say about poverty alleviation, they say poverty should be eliminated, which I guess should be the mantra for a country like India. Why should even one person be poor in this country? How do you look at the challenges in your view?
You see, all of these are challenges essentially, and especially yesterday in his speech he referred to the farmer issue, and he said that this is not, it's been a problem which is there for us, with us for decades, and this is something which needs to be solved comprehensively and through a cooperative spirit. There's no question of politicizing it, and that's what he said. So this is a challenge, alleviation of the condition or the distress of the farmer, and there's a very serious effort at doing that, and it remains a challenge. I look at that as a major challenge, and all those you know, aspects which were referred to yesterday continue to be a challenge. But definitely we will see a difference in the next 5 years, because these many of these challenges are a carryover, a legacy of certain understanding and implementation of policies, which cannot obviously be worked out in 1 year. There has to be a certain, and some policies will be implemented where you'll see the effect after perhaps a decade.
But India is a great ground, because you see a lot of issues here which really needs to be resolved.
Absolutely.
But Mr. Pant, what is your take on the fact that a lot of other things have been done simultaneously to ensure that there is division of responsibility between the states and the centre? So there are a lot of things which have to be managed domestically to see that the Indian economy really grows.
To look at it, one should go and look at what Constitution says, like what all we are seeing in Delhi in past few weeks or last week or so. There is a state subject, there is the central list, concurrent list. There are some issues which falls in the domain of the state government. But as we were discussing earlier, look, can you imagine which was the first state who has drafted a state level export policy, and that too way back in 1980s? It was state of Uttar Pradesh, the one state which is supposed to be laggard in all the issue, and under the leadership of present Coal Secretary. Ultimately, when we talk about national economic growth, central government as a entity does not produce anything. It is the sum total of what is produced in each state. And if you look over the past, which states are able to perform better? Your broad policy contours, be it the macroeconomic policy, be it the fiscal policy, monetary policy or trade policy, that is decided by the central government mainly. Those states are successful, those who are able to evolve their state level policies in and around the national level economic agenda, where they have the advantage. So it is right, until unless all states put together, like Rajasthan is doing something on the labor, that can set an example for the others. So each state has a one example on one different area, which others can emulate.
Mr. Pant, very quickly, if I ask you about the challenges, what do you think are going to be the challenges for this government?
Well, I'll look at it more from the economic side, maintaining growth, a sustained growth. To me, if it is 10% growth with 7% inflation, that is not desirable. I think 7% growth with 5% inflation is more desirable. Build up infrastructure, social and physical infrastructure. And to do all this, the one thing for which all the rating agencies are hated is control your deficit.
Okay, fine. What's your take, Dr. Chandramohan? The challenges?
On the foreign policy front, I can say that You were alluding to so many agreements that have been entered into. The question is to ensure that they're implemented in spirit. And that includes everything from the agreement with Japan, which included not just energy and things, it was also included sickle cell anemia, to producing low-cost medical devices. The variety of agreements that have been entered. We have been only talking about 35 billion foreign direct investment from Japan. So if you add up all these, I mean, there's a need to see to it that the conditions are created, that these agreements fructify.
Okay. That's a very critical challenge, yes.
Well, let me put it this way. There are two sides of this challenge. One is learning from and living with differences.
Okay.
And there I am talking about all kinds of pluralisms, you know. Pluralisms which exist in civil society, which exist in society by and large, between states and different. So learning and also living with them. And the other is reducing disparities, reducing equity. It's a huge challenge because you know, if you, for example, I just want to give you an example.
Very quickly, sir.
The government stands towards civil society, for example, is tending to be very hard just now. But had it not been for a vibrant civil society, the right to education and education as a fundamental right in this country would still not have been on the political platform agenda at all. If you see how it has evolved. So a vibrant civil society is extremely important.
Fine.
And we should live with many of these
Dr.
challenges.
Ganguly, concluding remarks, please.
Government is based on many civil society movements. Civil society also must be accountable. And perhaps the government which calls for a modicum of accountability risks being unpopular. But on the whole, it has definitely shifted the political discourse from one of division, of conflict, to one of aspiration. And this has been very clear in the last 1 year.
Fine. So we all really vouch for accountability, transparency, better governance and a better system in place to implement all those new schemes which have been announced and all the ones which are going to be announced and all the ones that we have seen for over years in this country. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us here. That's all we have for you in this edition of Public Forum. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.